I think 3 years into the business, I was the top industrial broker in Central Florida, and I wasn't even top 5 in my own office. There were many years where I didn't know if I was doing the right thing. I didn't know if I was going to be good at this. In this environment, finding and winning the business are critical. Nobody trains you how to run your brokerage practice. You kind of just figure it out. And it took us a while to figure out we needed to get organized pretty quickly. Having a system in place really help keep us organized and on track. I think industrial is set up really well for investors today.
This is your Real Estate Syndication Show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Today, our guest is David Murphy. He's a vice chairman at CBRE. He leads a high-performing, multidisciplinary industrial and logistics team in Central Florida. He serves small business owners and Fortune 500 companies, and he's ultra-focused on industrial and has been for over 25 years. He's one of CBRE's top industrial producers, and you're going to hear that come out today, just a ton of experience that he's going to talk about. And so much of what we're going to dive into applies to any business. And not just a brokerage, but I feel like as an investor, if you're thinking about industrial, you want to hear this show. You want to hear him talk about why he loves industrial and some things you need to know. But as a business owner, there's just some things that we hear often, but that we rarely take the time to actually do. And sometimes we overcomplicate it, right, as well. So that keeps it from getting done. But you're going to hear David simplify some things today that I felt was so important. I felt like for any business to know these things, these parts, components of the business, and who's doing them, who's responsible. And so you're going to learn a lot from David today. David, welcome to the show. Looking forward to really highlighting and jumping into your specific niche of expertise here today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, David, let's do that. I know you have, before we jump into that asset class specifically and some things around that, because I know there's many listeners who are focused on that asset class as well, on the passive side and the active side. You know, I know you have a background as a professional hockey player, right?
Barely, minor leaguer.
It's interesting when I interview people who were either professional athletes or military, you know, there's like, as they go into business and pursue careers, it's just, I don't know, it's different. You know, there's just that background has helped in so many ways. But maybe shed some light on that and how that's helped you in commercial real estate as well.
Absolutely. So I played college hockey at Penn State and then played a year in the East Coast Hockey League, which is kind of a double-A hockey league. I was nicknamed Suitcase because I was good enough to make the team, but not good enough to unpack my suitcase. The other nickname they had for me was Healthy Scratch. So I did not set the world on fire in hockey, but it taught me so much playing at the collegiate level and playing in the minor leagues. I was very small. I was 5'9" in the hockey program, and that was probably being very generous. And so I was an undersized player. I always had to overachieve. And what hockey taught me, and why I've got 4 boys, and I had them all into sports because I think it's important not that any one of them make it to the NHL or the NFL, but that they learn how to overcome obstacles. They learn how to lose. They learn how to win gracefully. And most importantly, they can level themselves up to be better. And so many of the lessons that I learned in hockey and how to kind of overachieve, if you will, carried straight into my commercial real estate career.
No doubt. It's so many character building lessons, right? That are learned in those, in those environments that just, stretch upon, everything you do the rest of your life. I mean, working with other people, right? Team building, and it's so crucial.
So much of those lessons and just learning how to grind, even when it's not fun. There's so many parallels to the commercial real estate industry.
So much of the mental piece, right? It's so crucial, right? That you're learning, as a young, boy or girl, either one. I mean, in sports, but the military helped me in that in a big way. And I contribute so much to boot camp, to being an entrepreneur. David, why industrial? I know you and I were chatting briefly about like why, you got into industrial when it wasn't popular. You said in the late 90s, but why industrial then? Why choose that path?
I started in real estate when I was 18, selling houses while I was getting my college degree at Penn State. I did everything but schoolwork, I think, at Penn State. I played on the hockey team and worked as a realtor. And when I graduated, I wanted to do commercial real estate. I just felt like I was better suited on the commercial side. And I went down to Orlando because my family bought a second home in Merritt Island, and I kind of loved Central Florida. And I went in and interviewed with, at the time, it was called CB Commercial, the precursor to CBRE, and met with the manager. And he said, "Well, I've only got one spot open, and it's as an industrial broker." And I was just super excited. I was like, let's go. And then when I get in there, I started having people sort of feel sorry for me. And they were like, "Oh, David, do the best you can. It's really hard to make money doing industrial. Industrial is kind of the lowest rung of the ladder in terms of what it was like in commercial real estate back then. Industrial kind of picked me. I grew up in a small steel town in Western Pennsylvania, so I was used to being around factories and industrial buildings, and so it didn't intimidate me. I was used to that environment, so I thought I could use some of those skills coming from the background in a steel town. But it was not the specialty to be in, and essentially, if you think about it, you get your fees based on what properties lease for or sell for. Well, back then, we were doing deals at $3 per square foot per year on a building. And I mean, you do a pretty big building lease and not make money. And so I think 3 years into the business, I was the top industrial broker in Central Florida, and I wasn't even top five in my own office. So I just kept grinding and believed that if I kept working, there'd be a light at the end of the tunnel. And it's definitely worked out. But industrial was not the chosen field. It kind of picked me.
Why not choose to a different asset class or choose to move to, a different direction?
I wanted to work at CB. I just thought that the platform was great there, and I figured it was kind of a niche opportunity for me because the perception was industrial wasn't that hot of an asset type. It also didn't have a lot of broker activity in it, right? So I was like, well, I could shift over to multifamily and or office. At the time, the office broker, that was the pinnacle position. It was a crowded area in office. And I looked at it and I said, you know what? Nobody's really knocking this industrial out of the park. And how about if I just become the very best at it and differentiate myself and get an identity as an industrial broker? And that's the direction that I went. And I struggled with it for years. I would leave the office building. I'd be going down the elevator at the end of the day and thinking, man, should I switch over to office, or am I ever going to make any money in this business? And it's interesting to look back now, 26 years later from when I started at CBRE. There were many years where I didn't know if I was doing the right thing. I didn't know if I was going to be good at this. There were no early signs in the first year or two that this was going to work out. And I just use, as you use the analogy of sports, I just kept grinding and kept working hard and trying to make a name for myself in the business. And it took a while, but we finally got there.
Speak to who you surrounded yourself with at that time. Did you have mentors that were like, "Oh no, David, you can do it. You should keep going," or was it a spouse, that was saying, "Hey, we're going to stick this out. I'm behind you," or like what really helped support you during that time?
This is a great question. My dad is in real estate, and he owned a residential brokerage company, and he did a lot of appraisal work, and he was very supportive. Bill Moss, who was our managing director at CB at the time, he told me to go meet a gentleman in Palm Beach by the name of Jeff Kelly, who's still down there and crushes it for our office in Palm Beach. Him and Robert Smith and just do a great job. And Kirk Nelson down there kill it. But he had me go down and meet Jeff. And so I drove down to Palm Beach, met Jeff, and shadowed him for a day. And then I said, "Well, Jeff, how'd you do in your first few years?" He said, "Well, David, the first year I made zero. And the second year I made 25,000. The third year I made 50,000. And the fourth year I almost made zero." And I came back and I talked to my manager. I said, "Bill, why did you send me down to that guy? Like, do you want me to quit?" And the message I got from whether it was Bill Moss or Jeff Kelly or my father or other people in the business was, give it 5 years. You've got to keep grinding. Give it 5 years. Don't be in it for the money. So many people come into commercial brokerage today, and really, or any one of our areas in commercial real estate, and it's how quickly can I make money? when can I be a partner? Where the attitude is learn the business, right? Learn how to create value and learn how to market yourself. And if you stay in it long enough, some of it is just sheer will and persistence. I think I've probably haven't beat competition. I've just outlasted them. And so just staying in the business long enough was really the answer for me. But all the mentors, and I had a lot, and it's one reason why I do this, why on my social media, and, I give back to a lot of folks. I'll answer questions. People DM me, hey, I'm in this. I don't coach. That's not a profession. I'm a full-time broker, but I like to give back because so many people helped me and they didn't let me quit. And there were several times where I really thought long and hard about getting out of the business. And those mentors made a huge difference to me.
No doubt about it. Me as well. It's yeah, game changer to have the support network, right? People you trust around you, speaking into you, that are ahead of you, whether you're a professional athlete or professional broker, right? Speak to strategies that maybe you're using to maintain deal flow right now. Over the last 2 years, I feel like, man, deal flow's just been uh, out the window, right? But as an operator, but speak to even as a broker, like how have you all or gotten creative or more creative, maybe even over the last couple years than you have in the last 25?
Great question. A couple things. One, we're a lot more active online, social media, getting out there, getting name recognition. I'm very active on LinkedIn. That's kind of my spot. Tried X and Instagram, but really LinkedIn. So kind of every 2 or 3 years in my business, just like most of the listeners in here, your business changes, right? If you do what you did 10 years ago or 15 years ago, it's not going to work. Competition changes, the environment changes. One of the things that I've done is when I started, I mentioned I did residential real estate when I was at Penn State, and I watched the residential real estate agents. One thing they're great at is branding and getting their self-promotion, right? Much better than I think we are on the commercial side. And what I tried to do was take some of that branding and that marketing and move it over into the commercial side in an area that was kind of stuffy and, hey, I'm not a salesperson. I'm, an account executive or whatever. No, you're a salesperson. If you're in the brokerage business, you sell. One of the things that's helped me in this cycle where business gets a little bit harder is you can find, win, and execute business. And in this environment, finding and winning the business are critical. Focusing on those two skills have really benefited me. And then I've got a great team that helps me execute the business. And so, but making sure you've got the who, not what, so to speak, of having the right people in the right seats and being a team. That's a big difference. Back when I started, there were not big brokerage teams. Just like there, in so many industries, it was a lone wolf mentality. Now we've got a 5-person team. We're continuing to grow, and we have different people in different spots. So we have finders, winners, and executors. And having that strategy, running it more like a business, has really helped us. Running it less like just trying to be a broker and work in your business, working on it, and spending more time making sure we have processes and systems in place and things that everybody likes to say they have, but a lot of people don't really have. It took us a while to build that, and I think running it like a business has really been helpful.
Running it like a business. I want to come back to the finders, winners, executors. I love that. But running it like a business. What's been I don't know, some game changing times where it's like, man, we did this thing, and it's like, or like you implemented EOS, or you implemented this thing, or you whatever it may be. Like, what were some of the milestones? It's like, man, if I had known this 10 years ago.
You hit it right on the head. We started doing EOS and focusing on traction probably 2 years ago, and that was a game changer for us. Just having that's not an ad for EOS. There's multiple systems out there that you can use. Pick one and run it, right? And that's what we did. Having a scorecard, keeping accountability, making sure that we are running our meetings effectively. Believe it or not, for many years, my partner Monica and I, we would not even have meetings. There were no team meetings. We just kind of go from week to week, and we were running with our hair on fire, and that's kind of how we did it. And we started adding more people to the team and realized, okay, wait a second, like we're running a pretty profitable business here. We should treat it like a business and not just as a bunch of star players on a sports team, to use a sports analogy. Run it more like an enterprise, right? And manage it. And that made a big difference for both our revenue, but also our mental health, right? Because we were always, is that listing renewed? Is this done? There's so much paperwork that we have in all of our different businesses that if you don't have a system in place, it gets away from you, especially when you start trying to 10x your activity and really going after it and trying to build to the next level. If you don't have those systems in place, which we found because we didn't have those systems in place, there's a lot of havoc. And so a game changer for us was getting on for, in our case, it was EOS and making sure we had accountability. We had a weekly meeting that had a purpose, and we had a scorecard where we kept track of our weekly progress and set up our what we call our rocks or our goals, and having those 90-day quarterly type goals. All that has made a huge difference, and know what our revenue is, what our accounts receivable are. You take those for granted, but in a lot of brokerage businesses, it's a lot of flying by the seat of your pants, and you're not trained that. By the way, nobody trains you how to run your brokerage practice. You kind of just figure it out, and it took us a while to figure out we needed to get organized pretty quickly.
Yeah. Now, did you hire an implementer to help you start using EOS, or is it something you all did yourself?
My partner's husband runs a large property management practice that ran on EOS, and so we had somebody from their team help us implement it, and we spent a day off site and kind of worked on it. I think we do EOS light, right? I don't think we're as but we have a small team. We're 5 people, and then a couple other support folks that we kind of borrow from other teams within our office. What we needed was the process. We needed to be scalable. It's kind of like an E-Myth type situation where how do we make the hamburgers, right? Like, every brokerage assignment's pretty much the same. We treat it like we've never seen that before every time it comes in. Well, we had to change that mentality and run it and have a systematic process. And that's hard for brokers because a lot of us, our skill set isn't in the organizational piece, right? It's why a lot of times the best brokers don't necessarily make the best managers of the office. We have a little bit different mentality. And so I think having a system in place really helped keep us organized and on track.
No doubt about it, it's so important. That's why I'm spending a few minutes here on this. But as far as jumping into some kind of system early as possible and having these things documented, what's the system you all use to document your processes and things like that, or keep them updated?
So we made a checklist. We basically went as if you were flying an airplane and running through the checklist of, okay, we're going to list an industrial building. Well, you've got to have the listing agreement. Did you get it signed? Is there a sign order? What's the sign look like? Do you have an easel up at the property with the I mean, we get pretty granular in our checklist. And then we have accountability because we have somebody assigned to that role. Because if you just have a checklist and you tell 4 people to do it, it never gets done, right? So we have a checklist with the person that's responsible for each item in the checklist. And so we know, well, if the sign didn't get ordered, we can figure out who was supposed to do that, right? And that's something we'll go over on our weekly meetings. If there's an issue, we could never point to who was in charge of that before, right? You'd have like 5 people, and everybody would be looking around and say, "Well, I thought you said it was okay to do a press release," and no, whatever. So having it's not just the process, but the back end accountability that I think makes a difference.
Do y'all use Asana or Monday or something like that?
We used every one of them. I think between CRMs and programs like Asana and Trello, and I think we've done every one of them. A lot of times we go back to Excel spreadsheets and just kind of do, it's kind of like we were spending so much time planning the thing and not actually doing the thing. We would have a team member kind of work for 3 or 4 days on some new Trello board and then come back and we weren't using it. We're like, wait a minute, why don't we just like create the simplest system, which is like an Excel spreadsheet, and just focus on doing the thing.
There's so much technology and it can be so great, right? But the only technology that's useful is the one you use. It's hard to get everybody to adopt it, but man, it has to come down from the top. And I've struggled with that personally at different times.
It's hard too if you're the least technologically savvy of your team, which unfortunately is me, right? So people are like, "Well, didn't you check your Trello board?" And I'm like, "Dude, I don't even know. Like, where is my Trello board, right? I don't know." And that's something I need to work on. I think that and AI, right? Everybody's like all into AI and trying to figure out AI. And I think it's a lot of times if you just make calls, do the work, build relationships, do the thing. Like actually, like we talked about this in our meeting that we just had, where we want to be more action biased, right? If there's a choice between coming up with a new software program or just making 5 calls, make 5 calls, right? And so I think that having all of these these shiny new objects that you can kind of dive into takes away from the blocking and tackling of actually getting it done. Now, I'm very excited about some of the things you can do with AI. We play with it all the time, and it's amazing some of the things it can do. And we're trying to implement it because, again, every 2 or 3 years, your business changes. But I think people make the mistake of going so far in that direction of the shiny new object and the new app that's going to change the world and forget that, I just spent 10 minutes doing handwritten notes. I don't know what the ROI is on those things. I don't know, right? It seems like it spends a lot of time doing them. And I know you can order those where they kind of look like they're handwritten from you and they can send it out and there's a little robot that actually writes it with a pen. But I think as we get more and more, tech advanced, authenticity and being able to know if it really came from the person is going to be even more critical.
I believe AI is going to push that in a big way. Like people are not going to know what's truth, and so being like in person or speaking to something like it's going to be valued more and more. I believe. You mentioned finders, winners, and executors. I love that. That you just like know, hey, this is what we got to have. This is what we have on the team. Speak to maybe the superpower, the thing that like finders have to have or be able to do.
So I compare finders to sort of like psychopaths, right? If you love making cold calls all day long, like, man, okay, go get it, right? Those are your people that are just, if you tell them to make 50 calls and you tell them that the other person next to them is making 50 calls, they're going to make 75 calls, right? It's a badge of honor. How much can we do that? Finders are really good at opening up the door. They will be the initial point of contact. That's the tip of the spear, right? Would be that the person that goes out and finds the business. Then what you have to do is you have to convince the person once you've kind of gotten the ball rolling that you're the best person for the job. And that's kind of where the winning person comes in. And then the execution is kind of getting just the blocking and tackling of getting it done. What I've found at brokerage is usually somebody's really good at one of those three. Occasionally, you'll find people that are good at 2 out of the 3. They can find and win, or they can find and execute. Oh, it's a unicorn to find somebody that's good at all 3, right? What I typically find is in brokerage, for instance, and this probably is true of all different vocations, but in brokerage, a lot of times you'll have 2 really great executors that are just awesome, right? The best brokers in the market, but they have no business because they can't generate their business, right? They'll do stuff that comes in through the pipeline if they work at a big shop, but their numbers are never at the top level, right? And you wonder why, because these folks are so good at executing business. But you've got to have somebody that can go business develop. The same holds true. There's people that sell the world, right? But don't deliver. And that would be somebody that's really good at finding and winning, and they don't have a back end executor. If you have 2 finder or winners, that's the worst because those people will generate a whole bunch of business and then get a terrible reputation in the market because they can't fulfill what they promise. So you have to have somebody that sources the opportunity, somebody that comes in and closes the relationship, and then somebody that executes the business. And if you have a team that has somebody really good at all 3 of those things, they're going to crush it. And very few teams do. I use the analogy of a rock band, right? Like you can't have 4 drummers, right? 4 drummers, that's not a good rock. Maybe, or 4 lead singers, unless you're like a cappella or whatever. But you got to have people in different spots. And it sounds so basic. And yet, if you just peruse the offices of a lot of commercial brokerage companies, you'll find 2 finders on a team with no execution or no capability to win business. That's the worst because they'll just make a million calls and not execute any business, right? You have to have somebody in each one of those seats.
I feel like it's probably that's experience talking. That just to see that, yeah, and I feel like most times, people feel like they're going to do all those things.
You want to do all of them because, hey, you're like, wait, why would I split the piece of the pie? A lot of times, what I find in our business is it's 1 + 1 equals like 1.5. Because if you have two people that basically have the same skill set, which is how a lot of brokers they kind of gravitate to people that they relate to and they think would be a good partner, but it's more of just familiarity. And if you have a team works when it's 1 + 1 equals 3 or 1 + 1 equals 4, and that is the biggest issue or thing that I see slows down a lot of the really good brokers in our profession that aren't producing what they could be.
So let's shift gears a little bit, David, and just like current economic climate. What are you seeing? What do you expect, as far as even the LP, or the passive investor that's listening, or even the operator that's thinking about buying that next industrial building specifically, or not even, but what are you feeling is going to happen over the next 6, 12, 18 months, and what they should know or be thinking about?
I think industrial is set up really well for investors today, and I'm in a growth market. I'm in Central Florida, so we have one of the hotter secondary industrial markets in the country right now. And what we're seeing is a lot of activity in the small bay space. And you can define small bay industrial, let's call it the 5,000 square foot space up to maybe 20 or 30,000 square feet. And that might be a rear loaded building, 180-foot deep front office. That kind of product is leasing very strong today. What's not doing as well on the industrial side are the bulk buildings, those big million square foot buildings that they built to find an e-commerce retailer or somebody to come in and take the whole building. That has been very slow. So I think if you're looking at your LPs are going to want to be putting money in, or where deals are, a lot of it is probably we're seeing a lot of activity in the small bay. Now that really is location dependent and the functional utility of the building, right? So you need to understand from an industrial standpoint what makes that industrial building work. I work with a lot of industrial tenants, and those are the tenants that go into the buildings that your investors are going to want to buy. They're looking at buildings that satisfy a couple things. One is transportation costs. If you think of what an industrial tenant's looking for, it's transportation costs and labor costs. The real estate cost for most of the warehouse companies that I work with is maybe 5 to 7% of their total spend. So people get hung up on, well, I'm going to go to a building that has a little bit less functional utility, but I can undercut the market, right? I can do a $5 or $6 deal where the fancy new building can do 9 or 10. What I'm finding is a lot of times the tenant's still going to go to the fancy building. One, because it's all about the supply chain. Every company is only as good as their supply chain in this environment. They will pay up for the building that gives them the most functional utility. The second thing they'll look at is ingress and egress, both to highways and also throughout the project, and make sure that the building has good flow. Those are things that a lot of the novice investors don't really understand. I think it's really important if you want to invest in industrial, get some qualified industrial brokerage assistance to get in there and really understand what creates values. Make friends with the brokers in the markets that you're looking at investing in. I take a lot of calls from investors, happy to do it. I think it's really important that you find somebody that can walk you through that process, because industrial's kind of unforgiving. If you pick a building that's not in the right location, or the ceiling heights are too low, or it doesn't have enough doors, or the truck court's not big enough, it can sit there for an awful long time and not get leased. So making sure that just because it's industrial, I think the problem is industrial got so cool so quick that anything with a loading door, yeah, let's buy that thing, right? This will be great.
Amazon's going to rent it from us.
Sure, absolutely. This is awesome, right? They're going to store all their packages here. I think it's really critical on the industrial side to kind of understand both the product itself and how that product relates to the market that you're looking at. So critical.
David, do you feel right now is a good time to invest?
I do. I mean, I feel like the biggest thing is it takes a lot more work to find that property. right? Because your sellers still think it's 2021 and your buyers think it's 2009. There's a big bid ask spread out there still. And you have to go through a lot of deals to find one that works. And I always counsel people to not jump in, to do the work, to go through the 20 or 30, you know, buildings that don't work to find the one that does. Because as you know, you always make money when you buy the asset, not when you sell it. That has become incredibly hard in this environment for those reasons that I mentioned. Somewhat disjointed expectations between buyers and sellers in this market, and then try to forecast rents. Because we've had in a lot of markets, like in Central Florida, we saw 10% up to 15% year over year rent growth. So if you're looking at a package that somebody's trying to sell you and say, hey, why don't you come on and be an LP on this project? And they're showing massive rent growth, kind of look at that and say, okay, I can see where you got massive rent growth from post-COVID, like a 2021 through 2023, 2024. But a lot of these rents are evening out now, right? And you're seeing a lot less of the massive rent growth that you saw. Really is important to talk to local professionals that understand the market that you're looking at to see if these market leasing assumptions make sense.
David, what are some of the most important metrics that you track? Could be personally or professionally or both.
Well, for our business, we have one, and it's gross commission income. That's our scoreboard. Is just gross commission income. From the side of an investor, what I'm looking for right now is, can I find a deal that doesn't have a lot of weighted average lease term? All right, so it doesn't have a lot of WALT, but you might have a tenant that you could mark to market at a higher rent, right? I think that has been the strategy for your investors on the industrial side, is find a building with low WALT, see if you can move that tenant out or renew them at a high rate. That was the strategy that worked for investors in our segment from 2022 up to probably last year at some point. And now I think it's really find an asset that you'd want to own for a period of time. I think the flipping or trying to buy something and get out of it in a year or two, that's really hard to do in this market. And so I think, for me, if I want to invest in a building, I imagine like an infinite holding period. My thought process is, are the grandkids going to like it? Right? If the grandkids are going to like it, okay, I'm going to buy it. I don't know. There's so much uncertainty in the market. I don't know if this is the time to be really biased on your appreciation. To me, in this kind of environment where there's still a lot of uncertainty, understand what your rate of return is, and is it sustainable, right? And so I'm a little bit risk off in this market. I think there's still some uncertainty that needs to work itself out through 2025. But with that being said, I'd rather be doing industrial than any other product type. I love being an industrial broker right now. Especially in a market like Central Florida, we have not really slowed down much at all. I mean, we've had, I'd say probably, third quarter 2024 maybe was a little bit slow, but overall it continues to be active.
Why such a focus on industrial over other asset classes?
I like it for a number of reasons. One is it's simple, right? It's a box. You store stuff in the box. When you have a tenant that leaves, you're, depending upon how much office space is in it, you're doing carpet and paint, right? And again, that goes back to what kind of product you're buying. If you're buying a specialized asset, I always look at what's my reuse, right? Because even if you're looking at a build-to-suit play, if you're looking at a build-to-suit, build it so that somebody else can use it, right?
Better have your exit in mind, right?
You got to. I mean, what I always look at is my test of it, and this is coming from a broker standpoint, is if I had to put a sign on it, how quickly could I release it to somebody else, right? And that's probably still, like, from the back of the envelope approach, how I would look at a building if I'm one of your investors, is how easy, because no matter who the tenant is, I mean, we learned that during the financial crisis, no matter how strong your tenant is, bad things can happen. And what I like about industrial, to get back to the original question, is a lot of times that product has a pretty good reuse capability, right? that one tenant moves out, maybe you have to put new carpeting in, kind of paint the walls, and another tenant can go right into the space, right? And that's a nice thing about industrial. Is the other thing I like about industrial is it's generally a need, not a want. People will look at office space and just, yeah, maybe we'll move. People generally don't go toward industrial space unless they have to have it. And so that's a nice thing, both from a brokerage standpoint and from an investment standpoint, is industrial is generally a need. If you find a building that checks the boxes from a logistics standpoint and from a functional utility standpoint, that's attractive. And then the biggest thing is, again, understanding the local market and making sure that the rents are in line with what the lease comps are in that market. Like I said, it's so critical. Make friends with brokers and other professionals in the market you're looking at. Get lease comps, verify that the market rent that tenant's paying looks good, and that if that tenant blows out, it wouldn't be too hard to pop another tenant in there.
David, what are some habits that you are disciplined about that have produced a higher return for you?
Never give up. Show up every day, getting up every morning and being willing to grind, even when you don't feel like it, even when you're burned out. And I still, as well as I've done in this industry, I still have days where I lose deals. I still have days where I get fired from projects. I still have days where I pitch business and they pick the other broker. Just kind of showing up every day has kind of been my superpower. Just persistence and tenacity and just always answering the bell every day and going at it and enjoying what I do. I mean, I'm very fortunate that we get compensated to put deals together, which is, super fun. I think that being able to come at it every day, even when you don't feel like it, even when you've had discouraging news and coming back the next day, in my business is really critical.
How do you like to give back?
A couple ways. One, I love to help new brokers coming in. I like to. I'm mentoring a half a dozen right now, just helping them get going. Industrial real estate, isn't necessarily like, I don't get the best warm and fuzzies that I'm helping the world, right? I'm leasing and selling industrial buildings. So I like to help younger folks in the business kind of getting going. And of course, we give back to a number of charities and other things, but I think it's mainly trying to help the next generation of real estate professionals come up. And I think we all owe it because we were all that person once. And no matter who you are, you had somebody help you along the way. And so for me, I think it's the best thing I can do is to get the next generation, going in the right direction.
David, grateful to meet you and have you on the show. Appreciate you just laying out even some of the systems that have been so important to you and why systems are so important. We hear that. I mean, rarely, do people actually take the time to document those and know things like finders, winners, executors, and having that systematic process for closing deals, right? And so we're just grateful for you laying it out like that, even why you love industrial and why we should invest in industrial today. And so, David, thank you again. How can the listeners get in touch with you and learn more about you?
Thank you so much. This was really fun. For me, you can go to Doc High Guy on LinkedIn or Instagram or X. Or if you want to email me, david.murphy@cbre.com. And I really appreciate being on the show.
Awesome. That's a wrap, David. That's the end of the show.